an attendee.
Hello.
Dr. Minetti, I just promoted you to a panelist. It's gonna ask you to rejoin. All right, she should be all set now to be able to speak.
Oh, and you can hear me too. Okay, great. Yeah, you can hear me? Super. Uh-oh, can't hear you though. Oh no. Oh no.
Sure. Beth Campbell. Present. Joan Cooley. Present. Dr. Christina Minetti. On Zoom. She's here on Zoom. And Glenn Speak.
Present, you can hear me now.
Is there any changes?
I would request chair to move our
I think you can hear me now.
Right, so I'm gonna stop the share. Share if you wanted to share for the presentation.
Are you waiting for me, Courtney? I'm sorry, I had to answer an email really quick. Apologies. So, okay. Good evening, everyone. As Courtney said, my name is Tiffany Spear. I am on staff with the City of Lakewood. And first of all, thank you very much for giving me the ability to attend remotely. I have to fly out of state tonight, so that's what I'm trying to get ready to do. But what I am here for is to discuss with you what is going on with the city's community outreach effort for the ARPA dollars, the American Rescue Plan Act funds that the city has been allocated, and then to get your feedback. And when I ask for your feedback, please, you can either answer as a member of LHAB or just your own personal opinions. What the City Council asked is that the city reach out to anyone and everyone, including those of you that are on the boards and commissions for the city. So you are experts for the LHAB world, right? In order to gather all of that and bring it back to them in August and let them then decide based on some of that feedback, how they're going to allocate the money over the next several years to assist people and businesses and organizations recover from the COVID pandemic. So with that, I'm going to start sharing my screen. And here we are at the Lakewood Historical Advisory Committee. And then I called you a committee when you're a board, sorry. And with me, I should say, is Ted Thielen. Ted is our intern who's working with me and several other staff members on the ARPA program as well. So as time goes by, you may hear from him either in person or electronically as he continues to work on gathering information about the thoughts of the community about ARPA. So again, we're here to hear from you and whatever organizations you might be part of or your own personal opinion of how you see people have been affected by, organizations have been affected by the COVID pandemic, in particular in 2020 when everything was shut down. And then also talking about what are the various ways that ARPA dollars can be spent. So what is ARPA? There are 4 basic intents behind the act that was passed earlier this year, probably early March, by Congress and then signed by President Biden. It's dealing with the continued health emergencies. It is also, sorry, one second. It's also to replace lost revenue for local government. One thing that the coronavirus relief funds from last year that the federal government dispersed did was not provide any support for local government operations. It was directly out to people and businesses, but this act does allow for state and local governments to replenish some of the money that they would have gotten otherwise if it had been a regular year economy wise. And then also making sure that the local governments have enough resources to continue their work to help, again, their residents and their businesses recover from the economic downturn. It is supporting economic stabilization for households and businesses. That's probably first and foremost in everyone's minds. And then also looking at systemic and economic and health challenges that have contributed to the unequal impact of the pandemic to certain populations, including certain areas of the city of Lakewood. Uh-oh. There we go. So part of the ARPA Act is broken down into those dollars specifically sent to state and local governments. And it's a long acronym. I'll just say what the money that Lakewood received. But the idea here is that local governments are authorized to spend dollars for households benefit, small businesses, impacted industries. So for instance, tourism and entertainment and arts and your historical society itself in the city have all been one among the most severely impacted industries, essential workers, and then the communities hardest hit by the crisis. And then there's another option for local government to be looking at water, sewer, and broadband. Within those categories, though, there's a lot of discretion for local governments, which is again why the city wanted to hear from residents and representatives about how the money should be spent. So in terms of how much money we're talking about, there was 4.4 billion with a B dollars allocated to Washington State for its use. About 176 million went to Pierce County, and then Lakewood itself received almost $14 million. And that money is being distributed in 2 what are called tranches, so basically cut in half. So this year, the city will be able to receive almost 7 million in the same 365 days after it receives the first tranche. Rules of the game that these funds have to be committed or explained how they're going to be spent by the end of 2024. And then the money has to be exhausted, has to be completely spent by the end of 2026. The City Council had a retreat earlier this year on March 27th, and they talked about ARPA at length and came up with several basic tenets that they wanted everything to comply with going forward. First of all, they're taking 1% for Community Service Advisory Board allocations to human services. Secondly, just to keep in mind, ARPA funds are for one-time costs, meaning construction of a project of some kind, whether it's affordable housing project or whether it's replacing lead water pipes in a poor area of a city, or whether it is purchasing additional personal protective equipment for city staff or people attending a public event, but one-time costs. The idea is not to duplicate how federal, state, or county or governments are going to be spending their share of the ARPA money. So a lot of attention right now on, for instance, the moratorium ending for evictions. That is something that has lots of money allocated already at the federal, state, and county level to assist with. So the city of Lakewood, in turn, rather than putting more money toward that, is looking to figure out how we can serve as what are being called navigators for people within the situation to be able to say, hey, we hear you. You've come to us and asked how you can get some help. We will be able to point you in the right direction to get that help as easily as possible. And then again, the community engagement, the city asked that staff reach out and work with stakeholders, experts, and then the community and boards of the city to hear back from people as to how they think the money should be spent. On the federal level, I just mentioned that there was a share there. 37.5 billion is going to housing overall, and that's split among homeowners, renters, and persons experiencing homelessness. There's also funds at the federal level available for unemployment, child tax credit, small business tax credit, emergency capital investment programs, and paycheck protection program to continue. At the state level, there's been a breakdown as well for the 21 through 23 budget, and then there's going to be a second allocation made by the state legislature in the 23 to 25 budget. But the one that's in place right now, again, you'll see there's a lot of funds being set aside for rental and foreclosure assistance. There's also money identified for assisting with schools and addressing how they can convert back into in-person learning or hybrid learning going forward. Childcare grants and providers, unemployment insurance, benefit relief, and family leave. Pierce County, there's a lot here on the screen, but long story short, housing, food, paycheck assistance, entrepreneurship and technical assistance for businesses owned in particular by Black, Indigenous, or people of color, but also small businesses, women-owned businesses. Summer youth and support and job programs, assisting with the court system, making sure it can get back on its feet to catch up with its backlog. Housing and homelessness I mentioned, and that second time that it's on the list is in particular for purchasing a hotel that will be used as emergency shelter. So one thing that also is laid out explicitly in the ARPA program is this idea of supporting people and businesses within what are called hardest hit communities and families. And that is essentially defined by income and communities of color that have historically and also right now been hardest hit by these types of events. So there's been worse health impact and worse economic impact for these groups of people. There is a number of items identified within ARPA that are encouraged to be spent in these areas and for these populations. So you'll see a list of those: public benefit navigators, as I mentioned, lead hazards, community violence intervention programs, assistance with housing in neighborhoods, and that's everything from assisting those who may be homeless at the moment to working with nonprofits or housing developers to build additional housing capacity. Looking at education assistance as well. So whether that's social, emotional, or mental health, or whether that's education tutoring, that type of thing. And then also early childhood assistance. So home visiting programs, for instance, or enhanced services for child welfare involved families and foster youth. This map shows you where in Lakewood there are qualified census tracts as defined by HUD. And these are all considered hardest hit communities under that definition I was just talking about. So down here, this would be Tillicum. This is Woodbrook. This triangle south of I-5 is Springbrook. Just north of that is part of Lakeview. And then up in the northeast part of the city is Monte Vista, or part of it anyway. So those 4 census tracts would be qualified as a hardest hit community for deciding how and where to spend funds by the city. And I should clarify, this is not limiting spending funding in these areas of the city, but this is where the act is saying, if you do, it's going to be automatically considered eligible, it's encouraged, and the idea of the background paperwork and justification that's required is less because it's assumed to be eligible expenses. This is a list that the city put together, the council put together again at their March retreat. So just very quickly, I mentioned already the Community Services Advisory Board funds, also expanding the City Human Services Program, mental health, drug and alcohol dependency, financial counseling, doing a youth employment program, rental assistance, mortgage assistance, and human services in partnership with outside groups. Coming up with an online place for Lakewood businesses to be able to advertise themselves and become more known outside maybe of their immediate community. Navigation services both to businesses and residents, and trying to make those easily available to those people in our city that, for instance, do not speak English as their native language, or are for some other reason not connected in as some other business owners might be. Supporting cultural, business, arts and entertainment venues and businesses. So continuing a couple of housing opportunities here, supporting what the county is going to be doing in creating a Veterans Homeless Resource Center, perhaps working with LAHSA or some other entity to build some transitional housing. Maintaining the city's existing affordable housing. So there are partners out in the community, whether it's Habitat for Humanity, Homeownership Center of Tacoma, or Rebuilding Together South Sound, for instance. But there's also the city's own program for seniors and low-income housing grants for people to be able to stay in their homes and receive those funds to maintain them. Then there's some facility and website improvements. So the city is more accessible to the residents and the general public, even if the doors have to close again in the future. Also making sure that the courts and the council chambers are physically able to support hybrid meetings like we're doing right now. And then also making sure that there is water available in all the parks, for instance, for hand washing and other sanitary purposes. Where it sits right now in terms of the city operating in conjunction with other governments, and that's certainly encouraged under ARPA, and it's a way to get more bang for each of the government's buck, is that we are supporting Clover Park High School's 2021 Youth Warriors of Change. We are looking to participate with Tacoma and Pierce County to purchase that hotel I mentioned earlier in order to have some emergency shelter for some Lakewood individuals every day. Working with Pierce County and other cities to consider how to spend dollars together, whether it's on infrastructure, sewer and water improvements, whether it's on an affordable housing project or something else, we'll see. Pierce County has applied for a grant, but even if they don't get the grant, they're going to set up a community navigator program. And again, this is that idea of if somebody needs to know where to get financial help in particular, but other types of counseling as well, they can come to the navigator, and the navigator will talk with them individual one-on-one and figure out how to best point them so they can get the assistance they need as quickly as possible. And then the other one that's here is that under the act, not all of this funding has to come directly from Lakewood to someone receiving the assistance. We are able to funnel dollars over to a nonprofit, for instance, who would in turn offer either grants to people or businesses, or use it in order to expand their own service venue and suite to help people out. The schedule for coming back to the City Council is August 23rd will be a study session where the information that we've gathered from all of the different engagement and outreach efforts over the last couple of months, and we'll also be bringing to them a recommendation of how to organize how they would spend their dollars. There'll be a public hearing on that proposal on September 7th. A week later, there may be a second study session if the council needs it. And then at this point, September 21st is going to be the day where the council takes action to say, we have this much money, this is how we're going to spend it. And I'm not sure at this point if they are going to allocate all of their funds in one swoop, or if they're going to maybe do half of it this year and half of it next, since half of the dollars will not come to them until next year. So this is why we're here in front of you. We're hoping to get some feedback from you and your thoughts as to how you think the city should spend its money. And it can be anything and everything. Like I said, it can be your personal opinion. It can also be things that you think based on where you live, who you interact with, what you've heard from other people. And it could also be in reference to what the LHAB is working on. It's just really, the sky's the limit at this point. We're taking as much feedback as we can gather. So with that, what I'd like to do is just see if Courtney maybe can facilitate a little bit how you guys want to talk about this and maybe throw out some ideas that I can take notes on.
Chair, I'll leave it to your discretion. Do you want to go person by person, or would you like to just kind of popcorn?
Popcorn seems to work for us.
Popcorn seems to work. Okay, so with
Whichever
that,
one.
Dr. Minetti, if you want to unmute yourself and we can popcorn in between the room and. with the-
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you
Yes.
great.
Oh, great. Okay, super.
I'll just start first. First off, this is so overwhelming. My brain is sorely taxed. That's the only part of my body I think that works. So there is so much information here, and I applaud this. I'm visually impaired, but I did go through it as best I could on my computer at home and learning my pages. The first thing that pops up into my very fiscally conservative, I'll just make that statement out front. This is a whole lot of money. And I think when a whole lot of money is thrown at governments, regardless of their level, there tends to be not intentional misuse, although I do not discount that possibility. But it seems to me that layers of administration, et cetera, oftentimes soak up some of the intent of where the money is to go and precludes it from actually reaching the intended recipient, if that makes any sense. So I'm wondering who within the city is going to ride herd on how this money is actually used, not in overall global terms and all of the language that we tend to use in when we're talking about grants and projects and things of that sort, but how it specifically will be used. And I say that from an experience as our family has a multi-million-dollar trust. And I am on an advisory committee that helps award over $1 million every year. And we very carefully research the people who request money from us, as people will for these projects. And then the issue becomes, how can we depend on those dollars being used for our intent? And I feel this fits in that same frame of reference, at least for me. So I think above everything else, and I never have discounted Lakewood. I think that Lakewood has been very fiscally responsible, but this is so much money. I'm curious to know how it's going to be handled within our city government.
Well, as it stands right now, I am the program lead for the American Rescue Plan Act program for the city. And so the reason you're seeing me tonight is because I'm it. But as I mentioned, Ted is an intern that's been hired to work on the program with me part-time. And then we are also coordinating closely with the managers from the Economic Development Department, the Public Works and Community and Economic Development Department, and the Communications Department. We haven't hired anybody new. It's the same staff that you already have at the city other than Ted. And we also, of course, have our finance director involved, and she will be holding the purse strings and following all of the financial rules that are in place per sound financial principles, as well as the act itself. The act requires that things be justified and tracked, and there will be annual reports required back to the Department of the Treasury. And there will also be, for the city council, I'm sure, it may be quarterly, it may be more or less often, I'm not sure, but there will be regular reports back to them as to they'll presumably say spend X amount in this category, X amount in that category. They may identify specific larger item projects like the purchase of this hotel. But however they lay it out, we will be reporting back to them regularly with A, was it distributed? And B, did whoever received the funds spend it as intended? Because the people who receive the money ultimately also have to report back how they did that. So this is somewhat similar to last year when the first act came out and the city was distributing business grants as well as rent assistance, and everybody had to report and provide paperwork as to how funds were spent. But this has one extra step because it is a bigger amount of money. It's about 7 times the amount of money that the city received last year. So there's another layer of making sure that we're regularly reporting to the Department of the Treasury as well.
Will there be formal auditing of the programs?
Yes, I think there will. And the city gets audited annually anyway, and this will be part of that process, but there may be specific audits done just on this program also.
Thank you very much. I appreciate.
Sure.
By the way, I'm Joan Cooley, and I should have said that because you can see us and we can see.
No worries.
Well, I'm Beth, and this is really exciting. And one of the things that I thought of when you were talking about a resource navigation service is that we do have some existing, like, basically like they're a food bank. And it would be actually really cool if there was actually a live representative that could help people who were there utilizing that service to connect with other services. You know,
Yep.
And, the church where the Nourish Food Bank for Lakewood is, when we get started back up again, also has Friday meals for the food bank recipients, and anybody can go. There's a bus stop right there in the parking lot. So anybody who would like a late lunch, early dinner on a Friday, they can go. And so they try and hook people up with other resources. And so it would be really great if there was kind of a more formal system to do that, and maybe some technological hookup where you could just apply for your thing right there while you're waiting for your dinner.
That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Good idea, Beth. I've served meals.
Yeah, you could, and they accept
That's
any
good.
number of groups to help serve meals and cook and everything too. So.
All right, thank you. If nothing is striking your brain right now, I think if you've got that hard copy printed in front of you, you'll see the website at cityoflakewood.us/ARPA. There is a survey on that website. So if you go there, you can, and it's just 3 questions long, and it just asks you, how do you think this money should be spent, essentially? And so we would love to have any participation on that from you or anybody that you know. You're welcome to spread it around. We're trying to get as much feedback as we can. So let's see, what's today, the 22nd? That survey is open until the 31st of July. So there's a little over a week left to provide feedback that way.
Courtney?
I've got some idea that comes right to my mind. Maybe not very well developed. Can I mention it now?
Sure.
Yeah, so I usually teach, and as everybody knows, the pandemic had a terrible effect on students. And it was very traumatic. I mean, not only educationally, but obviously socially. And as probably everybody in the room realizes, our schools in Lakewood are not really the best. And so it would be really nice to see a large chunk of the money go to help the young people who've been so adversely affected by this pandemic, academically especially, because so many were behind already. You can imagine if you're already behind, how difficult it is to catch up after such an event. So that would be really great. I'm not sure, you mentioned something about tutoring. I don't know how it would work out, but that would be really, really great if that could happen.
Okay, thank you.
Courtney? I'd like to piggyback on, this is Joan again, I'd like to piggyback on that. I'm 87 years old, and my whole life has been spent in the field of education in one form or another. And if I was looking at this globally and I were to pick a chunk, it would have to do with the youth of our community, whether it be recreational, whether it be our schooling. And I certainly agree about the devastation that COVID has had on our youth and their education. It breaks my heart to see what has happened. And I agree with a tutoring program or some very creative, out of the box thinking that comes to meeting the needs of this community. And especially those children in our Tillicum area and in Springbrook, in our areas. I have so many thoughts and ideas in my brain that swirl about education and how we can best reach children. And the decision is not always made by those people at the top of the chain. It is often comes from within the family setting, you know, finding a vehicle to have parents more involved in decisions surrounding the school. And I think what has really shot that to my head is all of the discussion about CRT in these last few months and the impact, good or bad, that it might have, you know, in the classroom, and who is making those decisions and on what basis making decisions. That to find a way of getting more parents and families involved, specifically in their children's education would be remarkable. We could pull that off.
Yeah,
I would say.
yes, I completely agree. And, you know, all these comments and these discussions and people getting all upset about critical race theory. I think critical race theory is the least of our worries as far as education goes. I mean, we don't need to worry about critical race theory because we can just get back to basics and we don't have to, you know, I don't think it has to be part of the discussion really.
Good.
Well, I can piggyback on with Joan and Christina. And, you know, since we're talking about, part of it is tech availability and stuff, that while we're doing that, to make a more robust homework help that allows, you know, just regular citizens to be accessible to kids so that they can make a connection, whether they're having a school online or if they could go in person, but then it's after school. And you need a little help to, you know, use that tech and just make that more available for the kids.
Okay.
Yep, super.
Anything else from Mr. Spieth? I haven't heard him tonight about any of this.
No, I know, because
Okay.
I consider it so complicated that I don't have a heck of a lot of ideas. I think the city is gonna jump on this and get the bulk of the funds. I don't know how to react as far as the Historical Society is concerned. I suppose being closed for a year and a half does something, but I don't know paper-wise what you'd have to do to get there. It's been difficult. I'm surprised we're still even open. We opened last Saturday. And we've been closed since February, March of the year before last.
Yep.
And it's been nothing but money. However, the money that we've spent has been primarily grants, so that doesn't qualify.
To get you on that tech bandwagon, with the homework help from the Lakewood Historical Society. If you're doing your Washington State history course and you need to know something.
There you go.
Glenn knows all.
And actually, speaking of that, Courtney, I think maybe this is something for me and you and perhaps Ramon to talk about a little bit offline, and also with Glenn or the rest of the Historical Society folks. I was actually on an ARPA webinar yesterday, and they were talking about specifically grants to arts organizations, museums, and I asked the question, does this include historical groups and historical museums? And they said yes. So there may be some funds that could be used to help with the reopening, Glenn, or figuring out how to expand your visibility in the community a little bit, if that's something you guys wanted to work on. But I'll get that information over to Courtney and Ramon, and feel free to ask me questions once I get it to you, Courtney.
But there is also, this is Glenn again,
Yeah.
A second museum in Lakewood
Okay,
that has been closed since February. That museum relies on some sales in order to keep the money rolling and acquiring more historical things.
okay,
And I don't see how a private museum, because it's not a nonprofit at the moment, although it's been a nonprofit probably since it started, but not completed the paperwork for that. Anyway, I don't see how that fits. As far as Lakewood's concerned, it's considered a business, and there's very, very little other consideration.
Well, it's a small business, so.
Yeah. Sometimes
what's the name of it?
Museum Antiques
Okay,
and Aviation Museum. Next to the now famous 7-Eleven.
It's not open yet, the 7-Eleven.
Now, November is what I hear. That's when the firearms start working and little kids all over start congregating, exchanging drugs and so forth. I know Chief Zorro knows the problem. I combated that in the 90s with one of my kids. It took all of his college savings to keep him out of trouble and jail. Because of those kinds of influences. So I'm kind of not very favorable toward 7-Eleven. But it looks nice, but we'll see how nice it really is in the end.
yeah,
There's been the store Kitty Corner, which is a Shell mini mart. There's been shootings over there, robberies, bullets come across Bridgeport, smash into the windows across the street from my place. And so I'm concerned for that, but I don't know of anything. I filed my comments, and I don't think any of them were really taken into account. Anyway.
well, public safety is actually one of the categories under ARPA. And one of the things that the city council has talked about is the installation of cameras in high crime areas to be able to track things even, when the police are unavailable right there. And on Monday night, the city council actually voted to purchase body cameras for all police officers in the city. So there will be both dash cams and police cameras, and then perhaps other cameras mounted in areas, like I said, of either high crime or maybe areas where they want to keep things safe. So like that active skate park that's right there too. So more to come on that. I'll pass that along as well. So I don't want to hog all of your meeting, so I'll get out of your way, but thank you very much. And again, if you have anything else you want to provide, please feel free to respond to that survey online. And you can watch things as they progress at the city council level starting August 23rd. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yep, have a good night.
Thank you.
Okay, has everybody looked at the minutes from May 27th?
Yes.
Did we lose Dr. Minetti?
Oh,
No, she's still there.
There we go. Yay.
Just a second. Let me pull the agenda back.
Yep, I'm here.
All right. We're hybrid.
Anybody have any comments on the minutes, or are they acceptable as is? Could I have a motion to approve?
I move to accept the minutes as they are.
Okay.
Second?
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Minutes are approved. I'll sign the sheet before tomorrow.
Yeah.
Next, any announcements?
I didn't manage to push my button quick enough to say aye, so I contribute a late aye to that too.
Thank you.
We
I have
heard-
I have a couple of questions or comments to make, but I'm not quite sure where they fit in the agenda for tonight. So let me know when I can bring them up.
Okay. Back to announcements. Any announcements from the?
Don't know. Are they an
from the city?
announcement?
I have,
Not really an announcement, no, more the line of questions and
I have an announcement. The Lakewood Historical Museum has opened last Saturday.
Yay.
I am on duty tomorrow from 12 to 4 for anybody that wants to come and visit. So also, I don't think anybody here has been to the museum on the opening day, right?
No.
Did anybody know that there's a ghost in the cabin? in the
No.
Museum?
We have a ghost.
Yeah,
Awesome. We have a ghost.
We have a picture of it?
yeah.
Is that you?
I'll never tell.
Let me see.
A ghost in the cabin. Lynn,
Yes.
with
I don't know
regard
if you
to
can
that,
see it.
do people, do you put, is there a notice in the Suburban Times about goings on at the museum?
They try to.
Okay, because, you know, I'm trying to think of ways, of course, that is one of our issues with Lakewood is getting information out. And,
Well, we have a newspaper every quarter.
yes,
Important things, I know that they have been on the Suburban
uh-huh,
Times website. There is a program on the 3rd of August. And that's on the Medicine Creek Treaty. Among some other books that this person has written. So that's one of the next programs, and we have our own environment now for programs. We've got about 60 chairs.
So that's it?
All the AV equipment. and,
Theater and all that stuff.
huh?
Where's it at?
It's in the museum.
Okay, yeah,
It's in the second dining room area,
nice.
which is just behind the existing exhibit area. Something I pushed for
Yeah, well, that's good to know.
many,
That's a
many
great
years.
great idea.
Because we don't need to pay rent for, to,
Yeah, you can just
we
set
used to
yourself
pay
up
rent
for
for
whatever thing you're doing.
Best Western, and then we paid rent to the library and on. And we had some programs here in the city. hall. Okay, so much for announcements. Any public comments tonight?
Let me check to make sure we didn't have anybody. No. None.
None? Okay. No public hearings tonight. Reports by the preservation officer or staff,
We completed that. We moved back to the beginning.
okay? Unfinished business, developing information on designated Lakewood landmarks with different types of designations. Those are all in our book. One thing of note is the Fort Steilacoom property, which the city is considering acquiring from the state. However, the actual National Historic Designation is 1 square mile of the property, which includes the park and a good part of the hospital, mental hospital. So that needs to be treated with care. Oh, you have the master plan for the hospital? Could you send me a copy of the map?
Yes, it's available online.
Okay,
That's probably the easiest
well,
way.
I've seen the one online and it's very,
That is all we have.
oh, really?
Yes, it's
Oh,
the
okay.
blurb, it's the blurb map, is what we call it, yeah.
Yeah. So there isn't much in any detail that
Mhm.
shows where you're gonna build and where you're gonna tear down.
No, which is kind of it is detailed under the building list, which buildings are being demolished and which buildings are not being demolished, which is included in the master planning document. But all that we have for future construction is what they've illustrated in those blurbs on the map.
See, many of those buildings were built over demolished fort properties, fort buildings, including the one that was behind of the drive down to the artesian well.
Uh-huh.
I don't know that there was ever any kind of archaeological interest in that. I certainly am interested, but I don't carry any kind of clout to say one thing or another, but I'd like to be involved in some of the situation or the decisions regarding history as
So,
far as the fort's
Well,
concerned.
if they demolish something and we find something
Something, yeah.
of significance, don't they have to stop and deal with it?
And we do have comments from
Technically,
DAHP that,
I
state
watched a
that
number
this
of
one.
those operations in action.
Yeah, it's what they should
They
do and what they
were-
actually do are not always
I
matching.
had permission to do the bird school. And I dug up the whole area of the school. And there was an archaeologist out there too. The only thing that he was interested in, he was hired by the state. He was looking for prehistoric artifacts. Chips from making arrowheads,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. He wasn't interested in nails or pieces of
Yeah.
building or any of that stuff.
It's kind of, you know, the whole point of archaeology is to go one layer at a time.
Well, my thoughts are that we keep Lakewood history in Lakewood. If we're allowed to find it, we ought to be able to present it in our museum. And I have displays from Fort Stolican in the lobby. Those were displays that I presented to the city council many, many years ago, when we were back in the community healthcare building, which is a long time ago now. Anyway, I think we need to keep Lakewood artifacts in Lakewood where they can be displayed and we know what happened around us. For instance, when they put in Motor Avenue, I asked the construction guys, if you find anything interesting, let me know. Well, one day there was a hugely encrusted horseshoe that they left on one of the post pylons close to the area. And that was one of the things that they found when they regraded the whole area. Now, it's not something significant, but you can still display it as a horseshoe that came from Motor Avenue. It's probably pre-car. It could have been a horse-drawn trolley, could have been a work wagon. Don't know. Anyway, that's gonna be in the museum for display.
and Glenn,
That's typical of what I want. Now, there was 62 boxes of artifacts taken by Mike Avey, who was an archaeologist at Fort Stolican and Pierce College. And after he died, they shipped all that stuff to the Burke
Oh,
Museum.
you took the words out of, that was my next question about things going to the Burke.
Yeah, well, 62 boxes. You know, I assume that they're these letter boxes anyway.
I think they could have left half of them.
Cannonballs, relics from the fort, Indian artifacts from the different camps all around our region. I got John Simpson to track down where that stuff went. He found out in college it got sent to the Burke Museum. I tried to get the Burke Museum to find out if there's things we can get back or get loaned for our local display. It turns out you can rent them back for $100 an item. Probably because of the inventory process.
And they had that beautiful new building.
Yeah, well, it's in one of those archives like you saw in the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
You have the big warehouse.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's my visualization of the Burke Museum, because I don't think you'll ever find them. If you requested it, you never find any information anyway. Personal frustration with regard to Lakewood artifacts. Well, so much for that. Unfinished business. The Historical Society is working on the grant to get historic markers for Woodbrook and the Bird Cemetery, which is on Phillips Road. And probably more, because we haven't had any new historic markers since about 4 years. Maybe more. Time
All right, is the
does
bird
fly.
cemetery, what was the other?
I don't know of any requests for historic designations. Although the only protection Fort Steilacoom would ever have is if the city declares it a landmark. And they were reluctant to do that because it was owned by the hospital. Anyway, so much for that. We'll move on. If anybody's got any other comments. New business.
Yeah,
We
we already
saw
did
that.
that. So we should get to Christina's questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, it just takes me a minute always to find the unmute thing. Yeah, I just had a couple of comments / questions. You know, I wasn't around when the historic street signs were being discussed and organized, I guess, last year. And I just wanted to mention that I've been seeing them around town, and it's really fun, of course, to see those things. But if you do like make more of them at some point, I think probably it would be necessary to like say what they are, because I noticed some of them have they say that they're the historic name and some of them don't, and I wasn't here, so I don't know why. And so especially the ones that are exactly the same, you know, if you see two signs that say Bridgeport Way Southwest, and they're only different colors, that looks a bit weird. Or, you know, the Motor Avenue one. So I don't know whether, you know, something can be added to those or in general. The other thing I wanted to mention is that especially the one that says Old Tacoma Speedway, my son and I were looking at it, and I mean, it's really squished. You know, we were like the second car in line or whatever, and looking at that sign at a distance, it wouldn't really be, you know, it's not that great to read. So, I mean, some of them are longer. That one probably should have been longer because there are a lot of words on it, right? So they're nice, but in the future, if they're going to make more, I think they have to think about those two aspects. You know, fix those problems.
Limit on them. It wasn't a choice.
I'm sorry, the first part of what you said was garbled. Could you say again?
Well, there was a limit to the size of the sign, and so they just
Ah,
stuff fit.
Right, right. Oh, because it seemed like I guess Bridgeport Way Southwest was quite long, I think. And then it seemed like the Old Tacoma Speedway one was, they're actually the same length. Oh, well, I guess then that would be a problem, wouldn't it? But if you can't, if you have to squish it and it's illegible, there's no point in making it, right? It looks not good, and it's not really doing what it's supposed to do if you can't read it properly. So those were just the two things I want to say about that. And then I have a question also. I wasn't around obviously for any discussions about the old American Lake South School that apparently had qualified for the historic National Register of Historic Sites. At least,
Little Red Schoolhouse, is that what
no, I think the Little Red Schoolhouse, isn't that the Custer Schoolhouse?
Uh-huh.
I'm talking about the one that was on Murray Road, where the Amazon warehouse is now. So apparently, I mean, I knew that building because I go to the beekeeper who is next door to it. And we were all really surprised because, all this time it had been, as I understand, protected. I was reading the 2002, like the big fat book that they published when they were discussing where to put the cross-base highway. They had different versions that they were looking at. And in this book, they pointed out that the school, it's a category F, or I don't remember what category it was, but they said, it's something that has to be protected because it's of historic interest. And the beekeeper also, he was shocked. He kept telling me, what happened? What about the school? What about the school? And I was just wondering, I thought probably the historic, LHAB must have been involved in the decision to demolish that school, since it was one of the historic buildings in Lakewood. And it was apparently an important one since it was qualified for the National Register. So I don't really know. I just wanted to ask if you remember, you probably would remember discussions about that, and if there are some documents that I could look at regarding that, because I was just surprised. Apparently at the time they were thinking of the cross-base highway, like how to make it. They were told, the people who were designing the highway, that if they wanted to route the highway through the school, they would have to rebuild the school as it stood someplace else, which of course was off-putting because that would take extra time and money and everything. But then in the end, when the warehouse was to be built, the schoolhouse, this is what the beekeeper told me, I didn't see it happen myself. He said, in a day and a half, the school and the Gary Oak grove next to it were gone. They were gone in a day and a half, and before everybody was, protecting it. So I was just curious, how did that happen? And was there some official okay by some historic body regarding that school?
Yeah, I can answer some of it. The schools were and are owned by the school.
Right. Yeah, that's what I understood. Yeah, until the end, it was owned by Clipper Park.
They decide when they abandon them and don't keep them up to the point where they start to fall in. A good example is the Little Red Schoolhouse that's at Custer.
Right.
That is a historic, on the National Register of Historic Buildings, and has been for many years. The plaque is inside the door. But the school board has not decided to do anything with the building and let it leak and mildew and. So,
demolition by
that-
neglect.
yes.
And that's exactly what's going on with that.
And as far as the Lake City School, that had a fire which destroyed the building before we could get any kind of a landmark thing. We're still thinking about a historical marker for it. However, there are pieces of it in the Lakewood Museum now. But that's another case. The school does what it wants to do with their own property. And it's
Oh,
not-
really? Even if it's historic, so they don't answer to any higher authority about,
Unless it's
really?
designated by Lakewood City Council that it's a designated landmark, That's the only protection that we have in the city.
Oh my gosh, so that the American Lakes South School wasn't considered a landmark?
Not by the city.
Oh gosh. I thought that if it was qualified for National Register, it would be, I mean, you'd think that the city would want to have it as a landmark as well. I just assumed it would have been if it was so important.
The owner of the property would have to have it
Agree.
designated.
They
Yeah,
have to
they'd have to
agree.
agree with it, and the school district is not particularly interested in that.
Well,
Oh, I see, because I see. Mhm.
city council is not interested in infringing
Yeah,
on
they don't.
property rights.
The city
So as
council
a
will force the
consequence-
issue, and the school district isn't gonna voluntarily do it, so.
Right. Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that explains it.
Designate Fort Stillicum.
Or the theater.
The theater, the Colonial Center, that's all private property, so we could get a community landmark designation, but it doesn't protect the building from being destroyed.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you for clearing that up. I think it's quite clear now. A bit disappointing, right? But at least I understand. I just find that so strange because you'd think that if it's had some historic recognition, the owner wouldn't be able to just knock it down. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just so strange.
Well, look, we've had a few properties that have just gone overnight.
Yeah,
Oh,
And,
really?
yeah.
Oh my.
yeah,
Well, that's really sad.
yeah, well,
It's
it's
very
some of the
frustrating.
things we need to start working on here, try and change opinions so that we can get some of these properties designated. Because unless they're designated by Lakewood,
Yeah.
there's nothing you can do about it. The owners have free
Yeah,
will.
if they're designated by the city of Lakewood, then part of getting planning permission for anything involves them asking us.
Right.
Yeah.
Mhm.
If it's not designated by the city, then that doesn't get triggered when they put in their applications.
Hmm.
You don't have to. ask
Well, so but the designation depends only on the owner.
property. Yep.
Mhm. Well, yes, but you can imagine that property owners don't always want to do that. I mean, you know, they would feel that it takes away some of their right to do what they want, you know.
It does take some of their right away to do with just whatever.
Right.
And
Right.
that's why, you know, and we don't have enough like tax incentive to make that palatable.
Mhm.
Well,
Lake-
it's
Lake-
it's another issue of community understanding and resolve to protect those. I think that if Lakewood as a community knew something was happening, that they had some heart and soul in, they would rise to the call, is what I think. And
Yeah,
that,
but nobody
again,
ever knows until after.
but
the
that's
event.
exactly right, Beth. That's exactly right. So, and again, it's a communication issue and it's our ongoing, I don't want to say struggle, but it's our ongoing commitment is to how to get people to know more about the important history of it.
Right. Well, you know, coming from a European background, you know, you can imagine that in England, in a historic village, you've got, for example, a Tudor house, or you've got, you know, maybe it's a Tudor thatched house, or like who knows what, you know, really old building. That person buying that house knows that the person that he can't just do whatever he wants with that house. He's not allowed to just put a tin roof on it or knock it down and build a modern box or whatever. So I think it does have to do with you know, the attitude, the American attitude toward property has to be transformed, because it's a matter of community, it's a matter of society. You know, when people move into our city, they should respect, you know, the things that we have here, and they should not be allowed to do whatever they want to do, because it affects everybody. You know, people are sad now. And of course, it's a school district we're talking about with that school. So I don't know how it can be achieved, but you know, other countries don't operate like this. And it's just so sad to see these things going. It's the same thing with the trees that I've been so worried about lately. I mean, we have these trees here, they're historic, old, big, important, and very special. And if somebody buys a lot with tons of trees, they should know they're not allowed to cut those down. And that's it. Same thing with buildings. Historic buildings have to have some kind of protections. And I don't know how to achieve this, but maybe other jurisdictions in America, maybe on the East Coast. I went to school in Rhode Island, and I think probably there are somehow they achieve more stringent regulation of property, even despite the fact people have these, private property rights. Right. I don't know. I'd have to do some research, but maybe somebody, I'm sure that somebody knows something more than I do, because I haven't really investigated this at all.
You're right about the East Coast, and even I think Seattle does a fairly good job of preserving historic sites as well. Courtney and Karen, you know this better than I. What is the rental population in Lakewood?
It was a
Percentage
It was a couple of years ago. I want to say 68%.
rental?
Yeah.
See, and Christina, that is another issue I think that we face in terms of our property owners, is that when you have the rental properties as high as 60%,
Close to 7.
close to 70%.
Wow.
That is a significant number, and it makes that sense of belonging, ownership, history
Mm-hmm.
valued, not valuable, but valued in the community at large. And it's one of the sad things, I think, about Lakewood, as I see it happening in my neighborhood.
Yeah, one, and that whole, non-resident owners, that's been a bugaboo for us for a long time. The Colonial Center it has got non-resident owners. The people who own it don't care about Lakewood. They care about money. And so it's been just a bugger to get anything done with that.
No, I can imagine. I never knew that it was such a high percentage of rental. I mean, I knew that Lakewood obviously has a high transient kind of population because of the base and whatever, but I'm not transient in terms of homeless, but I mean, that they're moving around. They don't stay long. But yeah, rentals, yeah, that would have a really big impact. So maybe we, mhm.
One of the neighborhoods that we were looking at, and we did a little study of not too long ago for a potential walking tour. It's just all, little formed concrete houses, and so they're kind of special. But many of those houses are actually rented. The people that live in them don't own them. And so it's really hard to kind of control what gets done with the property when the person who owns it doesn't live in it.
Mhm.
Who lives in it doesn't have any particular care to look after it. And the person who owns it just wants to do what they need to do to be able to get rental income out of it,
Oh,
not
gosh.
make it look historically accurate
Oh, no.
time period. So that's a little bit of a fight too.
Well, I guess the rest of the year I can try to look into how other people, in other jurisdictions have achieved this. That might be interesting.
Well, that was-
Maybe by the new year, maybe by Christmas, I could get something together.
if you know communities that have a good program, and it doesn't matter if it's perhaps in England or in the Northeast or wherever, they've got good programs to retain historic properties. We'd like to see those, and maybe our city council would eventually approve things.
You would revise your work plan.
Actually, Mr. Blythe, maybe this is actually a topic for the comprehensive, I'm not really sure, of course, because I'm new to this, but is this a topic potentially for the amendments? Is this something that would be introduced and then next year they have to like discuss it or I don't know how it works. Is that something we have to think about before August 20th?
It would be a privately initiated amendment at this juncture because it's not on the LHAB work plan currently. Or
Ah,
council essentially could just choose to take it up as a city initiated. But it wouldn't come from the board, I don't believe, because it's not an LHAB work plan item.
Right.
But I can
right.
get back to you officially on that. But my understanding is that your work plan is reviewed annually and
Right.
year review. And based off of that, that's kind of.
Right, that's the impression I had from you when I asked something along those lines before. So I'm sorry, but I have to go now, and I'll catch up. I'll look at the rest of the discussion on the video or wherever I find it. But thanks very much for the meeting tonight, and I'll see you next time. I'm sorry I have to go early.
Should be fine.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Back to the agenda. I think
We're
we
down to
covered
next
everything except
meeting.
for the next meeting, which is August 26th. I would suggest that sometime before long, we start working on the maps. Maybe even have a map planning meeting rather than,
That's a good idea, Glenn.
because we can all, I've done some of my markups. But we all have to get in agreement, and I think that the map we need to modify is the latest 2015. It's larger, it has more room, it has a little bit more detail than the smaller map.
Do they have a year on them?
It's
So we
a
can probably
trifold.
go with-
Those are all the 2015, the large ones, the tri.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the double, the driving only
okay.
is the one that
Yeah.
we, remember the printer got it wrong,
Yeah.
and so we got a
Yeah.
bunch of free bonus
Yeah.
prints. So that's the one that we aren't looking to update.
Yeah. so we can do
I've already got in touch with, well, a year ago, but I will reach it back out to her, to be in touch with the original graphic designer who did these. She did still have the file and was happy to take on the project, so I do
Oh,
have
good,
that contract to
okay.
get them. It'll be,
Because
we won't be
there's no-
starting from scratch,
Yeah,
No reason
yeah,
to
we'll
go
just make
start over.
modifications, yeah.
unless you
So
want to.
That makes it an efficient use of our money.
Yeah.
So,
Are we putting in for a grant for printing? Or
I
do
believe
we-
that we do have the funds allocated for
Okay.
that already.
Good.
good deal.
The other item, Chair, that I would recommend considering is putting together some type of narrative without those historic street signs. I didn't know if maybe that would be something that the board would want to discuss in a
Yeah,
future
that's-
meeting and
we
possibly assigning
need
that. between the
Section
board.
2
Yeah,
list.
yeah, and well, not just a section 2, but possibly updating our website.
Yeah.
I've been contacted by the Suburban Times about writing up a little bit of a attention piece for the
Oh, that's great.
process and kind of publicizing what those signs are. So if that's something you wanted to add to the agenda, and then maybe the board could take on drafting that.
And I wanted to update the map based on your map list in the last minutes. And then we need to start thinking about what we do for the next iteration. So any other activities to discuss tonight?
If any, now that we're back in person, if anybody has anything that you would like added or changed to the agenda, just please let me know by the Monday prior to the next meeting, so we can make sure that we have a full list of discussion topics. It's
Are
your
we-
agenda. So.
Are we still thinking about doing stuff with the nitty gritty tours guys?
Is it too soon?
Yeah, I think so.
Or, yeah.
I think
Well,
it'd be a
you know, I was kind of thinking about that, you know, in terms of like the funds and small businesses and all that kind of
True.
thing. And it's like, you know, available self-guided walking tour is something that would support them and keep them employed. It's good for Lakewood people. And if we end up in lockdown again and you can only go out, or if you, what better thing to do with your time than take yourself on a self-guided walking tour of Silicon Park? And get some, talk about the native plants of the area and a little bit of birding, the history of the Hill Ward.
Okay, any other activities for tonight? If
I have
not,
nothing.
all those in favor of closing the meeting, say aye.
I
Meeting closed.